the definition of a healthy coping mechanism or a strategy is simply a way to manage a difficult moment or experience that is not doing harm to yourself. So I'll just use a very
Mm-hmm.
obvious example. For example, if in my young days, I used to smoke cigarettes. And so when I was
Mm-hmm.
really stressed out and I was in my 20s, I would smoke as a way to manage my stress. And I was very unconscious about that choice. So I would, anytime I would feel anxious or nervous or stressed about anything, I would reach for that pack of
Yes.
cigarettes. And so from my physical health and from my understanding of my life and certainly my work with a lot of medical professionals, I know today that reaching for a cigarette is not a healthy coping way to manage stress. And
Oh,
so,
okay.
yeah, what we've done is we have come up with more than 50 ways that are healthy. So in that moment, instead of doing something that may be destructive or unhealthy for our body or for our self or for our partners or relationships, we I have all these other ways of dealing with stress that are much healthier. So, for example, journal writing, or going for a quick walk, or
Mm-hmm.
sitting down and counting to 10 and doing a couple deep breathing exercises. There's all kinds of things people can do that are healthy that actually have
Mm-hmm.
shown to help.
Exercise is really great for like a huge percentage of the population, but like if you suffer from an eating disorder or like an over, do you guys address that as well? Like
Yeah, yeah.
that's not a healthy coping mechanism for somebody with said symptom?
A lot of the issues relating to eating disorders, but also what is even more important to teach about, as much as we are really kind of the leading content provider on eating disorder education and awareness. We provide most of the programming for NEDA and BETA and ANAD and the other big nonprofits. Actually, what's been really much more successful in schools is to talk about disordered eating and disordered exercise. And so a lot
Okay.
of a lot of our handouts and materials that we, for example, that we give to coaches and parents are specifically on the topic of how do you know when an exercise or a coping behavior is on this continuum of disordered versus healthy versus a full-blown eating disorder. And so we help actually leaders to learn how do you tell the difference. And so one example with especially individuals that have an eating disorder, and we estimate now there are 38 million Americans that are struggling with an eating disorder, including binge eating disorder, many of whom go unnoticed because they never talk about their illnesses. Well, if that child is being taught, for example, something literally going on in the schools right now, that when you have a cupcake for lunch, you have to go outside and exercise immediately after. And if that child is
Oh my goodness.
predisposed, I know, to have an eating disorder, what will end up happening, experts tell us, is that they may actually end up developing a full-blown eating disorder. And so in that instance, exercise is not always a healthy coping strategy. Though there are certain
Mm-hmm.
forms of exercise that are universally acceptable. For example, some forms of yoga, some forms
Mm-hmm.
of meditation, of mindfulness exercises, so deep breathing or meditation. There are certain styles of yoga that have been cleared even when patients are in recovery for eating disorders, but the person with an eating disorder often has that predisposition to want to act out with overexercise. So we don't always recommend that exercise be the only way that a person manages stress. It's a very popular way to manage stress in America, but it leads to
But
almost exercise addiction.
Right.
mm-hmm.
We address issues of mental health and what I call mental fitness, and the issue of bullying. Researchers, for example, Dr. Stephen Hinshaw at UC Berkeley, has a study out that in a book he published called The Triple Bind, where he's saying that a third of the teenage girls in our culture are now either severely depressed, acting out with bullying or violence. They are committing acts of self-harm, and they
Mm-hmm.
are very hopeless. And it was a very sad study, and I read it in about 2009 when his book came out. And in that work and in that way, we are educating about all of these things are really issues of mental health. They are interconnected, and it's a child will act out in any number of ways, whether it's through drugs or through sexual aggression or through bullying or through violence or self-harm or eating disorders or addictions, when they are experiencing kind of an imbalance in terms of their mental wellness. And so in that way, we educate about really trying more to promote the positive. We try to promote the mental fitness so that children aren't being bullied and experiencing acting out in that way, in such a violent way to their community.